Hi guys, today I want to give you a little bit of a psychoanalytic point of view on the NI dominance, INFJ's fantasy of repair, INTJ's fantasy of repair. This is a topic that I've discussed a few times, but so far I haven't really dug that deep into the unconscious dynamics at play. And this video will also hopefully give you a taste of what it means to think psychoanalytically, because as you know, the inventor of the theory of type, Carl Jung, was a psychoanalyst. I mean, he called his approach analytical psychology to distinguish himself from Freud after their break, but essentially he was a psychoanalyst, and all the great thinkers of the psyche and of the unconscious have been psychoanalysts. Curiously enough, you won't find a lot of people online discussing these issues, discussing issues of personality from a psychoanalytic standpoint. You might think that, like, sometimes the perspective is psychoanalytic because some psychoanalytic terms are used, like ego, like id, like unconscious and other things. But that's not thinking psychoanalytically. To think psychoanalytically is to try to get to grips with unconscious dynamics, because you're trying to get to grips with unconscious dynamics, and particularly with an emergence that is quite primitive in early childhood. By definition, psychoanalysis is conjectural. It's more about an exploration, trying to provide a narrative, than it is to provide like a clear, like, fail-safe description or demonstration or explanation. So if you want to go, basically, if you want to go deep about the unconscious roots of psychological structure and personality structure, you have to be willing to kind of take risks, to explore, to be open to discussion, to exchange perspectives and points of view, and to not be too quickly shocked or too quickly sort of critical of points of view that might seem at first quite strange, because that's what psychoanalysis does. And that's what I'm going to do in this video today. Guys, don't forget that giving a like to this video helps with the referencing, so it costs you nothing. Please give me a like. Also, don't forget that you can support me on Patreon if you'd like to hear more of me. I do deep dives on the Patreon. Supporters get access to those deep dive 20 to 30 minute videos where every 2 weeks, where usually the theme is suggested by a member of the community. The latest one was what would an NI dystopia look like? It's really good. There's a nice vault of these videos already. Another nice perk is access to our Discord server, the Fourfold, if you want to interact with me and others on a daily basis. And also, I could not do this without you. I need your support. Please consider supporting me in these difficult times. The link to my Patreon is down below. Okay, so thinking psychoanalytically then, what could we say about this fantasy of repair? Of course, this very notion of a fantasy of repair, fantasy PH, already a psychoanalytic notion, and I'm quite sure that you would have come across it very rarely, or maybe never, on personality communities being discussed. People will discuss their fantasies with an F, conscious fantasies and daydreams and so on. Their fantasies with PH, which are much more primitive, much more originally from much deeper within the unconscious, by definition more disguised. They're hidden from us because that's what the unconscious does. The repair fantasy is pretty primitive. The cleansing fantasy, which I suggested was more akin to a TI dominant fantasy. Someone suggested, well, it's not really cleansing with TI, it's like reducing things down to their basic elements, their essences. So it's more about reduction than about cleansing. I understood the point of view, but the thing is, reduction is not an unconscious notion. It's way too critically polished a notion to apply to the unconscious. The most primitive the fantasies that a child has are about loving something, hating something, wanting to repair something, wanting to dirty something, like spoiling things. Spoiling and repair go together. Spoiling and cleaning can go together. Cleaning, cleansing. These are primitive experiences, and this is it is out of these primitive experiences that you later get more conscious elaborations and elucidations, such as the terms we use by when we say reduction. That was just for clarification and context, and also a response to this viewer. So, the fantasy of repair, if we have to speculate about where it comes from, right? because we could say, well, everyone has an unconscious, and the unconscious can be described as an interlocking sort of tapestry of fantasies with a fantasy that's dominant around which other more subsidiary fantasies are organized. So maybe for some types it would be repair, for some other types it would be omnipotence, for some other types it would be cleansing, and the whole work articulated around getting to a kind of whole list would be very cool, and I probably would need the help of people from other types to give me access to their subjective experience in more detail to be able to do that work. It's very collaborative in itself. The fantasy of repair, though, the way that I would conjecture about its origin, it's definitely a psychoanalytical perspective, so be aware of that, is that I think that birth itself is experienced on some level as traumatic by an infant. It is the trauma that activates the life impulse and the fear of death, and of course these go together. Already in the fantasy world of the child between 0 and 1 years old, so the infant, ever since Melanie Klein, who was a pioneer in the psychoanalysis of young children. It's controversial, but she did it, and she came up with a lot of really interesting insights. Probably the most important insight that came from the work of psychoanalyst and anti-dominant, in this case INFJ, Melanie Klein, is that the fantasy landscape of the infant is already extremely rich. And she was able to see that from doing psychoanalysis with young children. It's a lot richer than we imagine. And it builds itself rather quickly, okay? Now, I would tend to surmise that anti-dominants experience birth as traumatic with a particular kind of intensity, and that in their fantasy experience, they experience themselves as on some level guilty of this kind of breaking apart of fusion, breaking apart of the womb. Later on, in the experience of being with the mother, usually, and being fed, nourished by the mother, the NI is already forming as a result of this first experience. But I would say that at that point, the NI dominance is on the way to NI. The tapestry is not completely formed yet. What happens in the relationship to the mother? In cases where the love is accompanied by a feeling of not being quite understood, there's a questioning of the authenticity of that love, perhaps the fear that the love is given to someone that is not really me, so someone else, or that the love is not really love, it's just pretending to be, mixed with envy. So that would be more like a form of anger and defiance, mixed with envy for what's shown of the love given them, despite the fact that in their fantasy, they are in some sense responsible for the first rupture, the breaking of the womb. There's envy of just how good the mother or the breast is at that moment. And in fantasy, a spoiling. That's envy followed by spoiling. A spoiling that threatens destruction of this idealized mother. A feeling of guilt that becomes overwhelmingly present and then fuels the desire for repair. This is the blueprint, this is the prototype of the fantasy of repair as it is fully formed. Like I said before, the fantasy of repair is present in all people, which means that this experience I described about envy and spoiling and reparation, called reparative anxiety or depressive anxiety in the works of Melanie Klein, that's present. Every child goes through this phase. What I'm saying is that for the NI dominant, there's something about the experience of the very young NI dominant that makes it so that, first of all, birth is traumatic in a different way, and that there is almost like an assumption of original sin on the part of the infant in fantasy, and it's in fantasy, but it's much more developed than we thought. The intuition is much more keen than we thought. And second of all, the replay of this rupture in the growing separation from the mother, the envy toward the mother, the anger toward the mother, and the fear that the good object that is the mother has been destroyed, and the impulse to reparation, I think takes a, if you like, a kind of place in the unconscious psyche that has more numinosity to it, has more intensity to it, and makes it more likely that this fantasy of repair, this narrative of repair, becomes the kind of meta-narrative around which the other sub-narratives become articulated. It's quite psychoanalytic an explanation. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. At the very least, I will have given you a taste of what it means to think psychoanalytically, hopefully. You know, guys, that if you want to deepen your understanding of NI and of INFJs in particular, I have 2 books that you can get at the links below. You'll first link to the Infinite Soul, but also links to the Ecstatic Soul. The Ecstatic Soul is all about the INFJ consciousness and INFJ mind, the internal world of the INFJ. You need it for a deep understanding of this type. You also need this book, which is all about the INFJ in the world, right? He has this kind of mind, or she has this kind of consciousness in the world. How do we find meaning, purpose, and value as INFJs in this world we often find quite hostile? Get these 2 books, the links are below, and I'll see you tomorrow, guys.